Far past the last shipping lanes charted with confidence, where the North Atlantic stops behaving like an ocean and starts behaving like a verdict, there is a place the maps almost forget to finish. Here, the water turns the color of hammered pewter before a storm. Then, within the hour, glass flat and blinding under a sun that seems surprised to find anything to shine on. Fog rolls in not as weather, but as a kind of tide, swallowing headlands whole, and when it lifts, it leaves behind cliffs that look freshly carved, as though the land itself is still being decided. The central image holds an anvil in the sea. Something is being forged here, hammered by wind, cooled by fog, struck again by the tide, and whatever comes off that anvil has no choice but to be hard on the outside and warm somewhere far beneath the surface. This is a coastline of extremes held in the same breath. Cliffs that fall 600 feet into whitecaps sit an afternoon's drive from harbours, so still a rowboat's wake is the only line on the water. Icebergs the size of cathedrals drift past villages where a garden fence took 3 generations to build. Isolation and intimacy, wildness and gentleness share the same shoreline, sometimes the same hour of the same day. But its true character lies not just in the shape of its coastline, but in the people who decided, against every reasonable argument, to stay on it. This is a story built on a contrast that never quite resolves. One of the oldest ways of life left on the continent, wrapped around one of its newest provinces, a place that joined its nation only in living memory, yet whose roots in these rocks predate that nation's flag by 400 years. This is a story not of survival, but of belonging. Before we begin, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Leave a comment below with your country and city. We always enjoy seeing how far these journeys reach. This is the story of a people who took a hard, beautiful, unforgiving edge of the world and made it home. The elements here do not decorate the background, they set the terms. Wind off the Labrador Current does not simply blow, it arrives with intent, bending black spruce into permanent, wind-combed angles that locals call tuckamore. Trees so shaped by decades of gale that they grow sideways instead of up. Fog can erase a harbour's far shore in the time it takes to boil a kettle. Snow squalls sweep in off the water with almost no warning, turning a bright noon into a whiteout by 1 o'clock. Living inside that unpredictability breeds a particular temperament, patient, watchful, quick to adapt, slow to complain. A Newfoundlander does not ask whether the weather will change. The only question is when, and what to do in the meantime. This produces a people who plan in contingencies, The wood is stacked before it's needed. The boat is lashed down before the sky demands it. The visitor is fed before anyone asks if there's enough. Caution here is not fear. It is a form of respect, learned from a coastline that has claimed enough boats and enough lives that nobody needs the lesson repeated twice. And yet the same weather that threatens also provides. The Labrador current that chills these shores also carries the nutrients that once filled these waters with more cod than any people could count, feeding communities that grew up entirely around the rhythm of the sea. Respect for the water here runs in both directions at once, gratitude and wariness, braided together, inseparable. Across the whole island, one of the largest in North America, larger than Ireland, live barely 500,000 people, thinner on the ground than almost anywhere else you could stand, and still call yourself in a province. Drive an hour outside St. John's, the capital, and towns shrink to a few hundred souls, then a few dozen, then a handful of houses clustered around a wharf like a hand cupped against the wind. In outport communities, the ones down narrow gravel roads with a bay at the end of them, everyone is known, not merely by name but by family line, by boat, by which cove their people fished for 3 generations. A stranger's truck idling at the general store is noticed before it has finished parking. News of a birth, an illness, a good catch, or a bad one travels faster than any signal a tower could carry, passed hand to hand across kitchen tables and church steps. This is not surveillance, it is belonging. To be known that completely is to be held that completely. When a roof needs shingling or a widow needs her wood split, the whole cove simply shows up, no invitation required. Because the alternative, someone struggling alone within sight of 40 houses, is not a real option here. Morning in a Newfoundland outport has its own unhurried liturgy. Before full light, boots on gravel, the low thrum of a diesel engine warming at the wharf, a door creaking open at the one general store that sells everything from nails to bread to fishing line off the same 3 aisles. The ritual is not the errand, it is the exchange around it. A conversation at the counter about the tide, about a cousin's operation in St. John's, about whether the Kaplan will roll in on schedule this year. This is how the community keeps its own pulse, checked daily, the way a doctor checks a wrist. Someone always asks after someone else's mother. Someone always mentions the weather first, as though it needs to be acknowledged before any other subject is permitted. By mid-morning, the wharf has its own choreography. Nets checked, buckets rinsed, a boat idling out past the breakwater while another comes in low in the water, its catch glinting silver in the hold. Gulls circle with the practiced patience of creatures who know exactly when the scraps come. None of it is performed for anyone watching. It simply repeats, day after day, the way tide repeats, because the rhythm itself is the point. The kitchen table as first institution before church, before government, before any formal structure, there is the kitchen. Not the good room kept for company, but the working kitchen. Usually the warmest room in the house, where the wood stove never quite goes cold and the table has absorbed 40 years of elbows. Family in Newfoundland is not simply a unit, it is an inheritance system, passed down not in money, but in knowledge, how to read a sky, how to splice a rope, how to make a boil up over an open fire that would embarrass a chef and satisfy a fisherman completely. Grandparents are not retired from usefulness here, they are the archive, the ones who remember the last good cod year, the storm that took the wharf in '66, the songs nobody wrote down because nobody needed to. 3 and 4 generations often live within shouting distance of one another, sometimes under the same roof, more often in houses close enough that a child can be handed from one to the next without a car ever being started. Family here absorbs shock, job loss, illness, a bad season on the water, the way a breakwater absorbs a swell, quietly, before it reaches anyone unprotected. There is a named tradition here for the harvest gathering, though in Newfoundland, the harvest was never grain, it was fish, and the community ritual built around it is called, plainly and without embellishment, the time. A time is part potluck, part barn dance, part wake, for whatever hardship the season has brought, held in a community hall strung with lights, an accordion in one corner and a fiddle answering it from another. Historically, times marked the end of the fishing season, when the boats came in for good and the whole outport needed, all at once, to eat together, dance together, and exhale together after months of grinding labour. Today, the tradition persists in altered form. Fundraisers for a family whose house burned, send-offs for young people leaving for work on the mainland, welcomes home for the ones who come back. The name has outlasted the original occasion, because the function beneath it, gathering everyone, feeding everyone, dancing until the night forgets its own hour, never stopped being necessary. At a proper time, nobody sits for long. Chairs exist mainly as a formality between dances. Someone always has a spoon or an accordion, and somewhere past midnight, someone will sing a song their grandmother sang, and the room will go quiet enough to hear the wind outside, deciding whether to join in. If the kitchen is the first institution, the second is the local pub, though in Newfoundland's smaller communities, pub often means something closer to a legion hall or a single room attached to someone's house, doubling as tavern, post office, and unofficial parliament all at once. In St. John's, this culture reaches its most concentrated form on George Street, reputed to have more bars per square foot than any other street on the continent, where fiddle music spills out of doorways until the small hours and strangers are handed a shot of screech, the traditional dark rum, as part of a mock screech-in ceremony that ends, invariably, with a kiss on a stuffed cod and a round of applause. It is theatre, but sincere theatre, a rite that turns visitors into honorary Newfoundlanders in the space of one ridiculous delighted minute. Out in the smaller coves, the equivalent institution is quieter, but no less vital. A room with a bar, a dartboard, a television nobody watches, and the same dozen or so regulars who have been arguing about the same dozen or so subjects for decades. This is where news becomes story, where grief becomes shared, where a bad day is metabolized into something bearable by the simple act of saying it out loud to people who already know the ending and stay to hear it anyway. Newfoundland English is its own dialect, thick with words that exist nowhere else in the English-speaking world. Morsey for damp, foggy weather, Sleven for a sly, untrustworthy sort, stunned not as an insult but a gentle needling, some used as an intensifier, so that some good outranks merely very good. Linguists have catalogued this speech as one of the most distinct English dialects on earth, carrying traces of West Country English and Southern Irish brogue frozen in place since the earliest settlers arrived, then left largely undisturbed by the isolation that shaped everything else here too. Storytelling is not a hobby in Newfoundland. It is a form of preservation. Oral tradition carried family histories, shipwreck accounts, and ghost stories, tales of phantom ships seen glowing on the water before a storm, retold at kitchen tables until the youngest child in the room could recite them without prompting. Music does the same work by other means, the accordion and fiddle carrying jigs and reels across 150 years with barely a note altered. The words of old sea shanties updated generation to generation to include whichever uncle most recently made a fool of himself hauling nets. Craft, too, is a carrier of memory. A properly tied trap net, a dory built by eye without a blueprint, a quilt stitched from decades of flour sacks, these are not nostalgia. They are functioning knowledge, still taught, still used, still necessary. The history here was never gentle. Early settlers endured centuries without formal roads connecting one outport to another, entire communities reachable only by boat well into living memory. The cod fishery that built this place also broke it. A resource assumed inexhaustible for 400 years collapsed within a single generation, and the 1992 moratorium that followed put roughly 30,000 people out of work in one stroke, the largest single layoff in Canadian history. Beyond economic hardship, Newfoundlanders carry a quieter, deeper grief from Beaumont-Hamel, where the Newfoundland Regiment was nearly annihilated in a single morning during the First World War, a wound still marked every July 1st, the same date the rest of Canada celebrates its founding, observed here first, and more solemnly as Memorial Day. None of this is dwelt upon with self-pity. It surfaces instead as a dry, understated pride, a shrug and a half smile that says, yes, it was hard, and yes, we're still here. The hardship is acknowledged, folded into the identity, and then set gently aside in favor of getting on with the day. Hockey claims its share of devotion here as it does everywhere in Canada. Rinks and backyard ponds turning into makeshift arenas the moment ice thickens enough to hold a child's weight. But Newfoundland keeps older games too, ones that rarely travel off the island. Bull hauling and informal regattas mark the St. John's Regatta on Quidi-Vidi Lake, the oldest continuous sporting event in North America. A rowing competition that has run nearly every year since 1816, drawing the entire city out for what functions less like a race and more like a civic holiday. In outports, informal games persist too. Foot races down the wharf, impromptu games of cat played with a stick and a whittled peg, community darts leagues fiercely contested in the same halls used for times and funerals alike. None of these carry Olympic ambitions. Their value lies precisely in their smallness. Everyone plays. Everyone knows everyone else's technique and tendencies, and the trophy matters far less than the bragging rights that follow it home. For nearly 5 centuries, the Newfoundland economy meant one thing: cod. Entire outports existed for a single purpose: proximity to a good fishing ground, and the rhythms of daily life bent entirely around it. Salt cod, dried on wooden flakes in the summer sun, became the export that connected this remote coast to markets as far as the Caribbean and southern Europe, long before Newfoundland had roads worth the name connecting its own communities to each other. Alongside cod came sealing, an even harsher trade. Men walking out onto shifting pack ice each spring in pursuit of pelts, a livelihood that produced both fortune and tragedy in roughly equal measure. Logging and small-scale farming filled in where the sea could not, though the thin, rocky soil here has never supported agriculture at any real scale. The ocean was always going to be the primary ledger this economy balanced against. This was a livelihood built on physical risk, accepted as simply the cost of living here, where a good season meant a family ate well through winter, and a bad one meant belts tightened everywhere at once, the whole community absorbing the shortfall together rather than any single household bearing it alone. Then, the ledger changed. The cod moratorium of 1992 did not simply disrupt the traditional economy. It ended it, nearly overnight, for an entire way of life that had never known another center of gravity. In its place, offshore oil rose with startling speed. The Hibernia platform, then Terra Nova and White Rose, floating a new economy on the same waters that had drowned the old one. Modernity did not arrive here gradually, the way it seeped into larger nations over a century of incremental change. It arrived almost overnight and in plain sight, an oil rig visible from a wharf where dories still sit overturned on the rocks, a fibre optic cable running beneath the same water where handlines once went down for cod. Young Newfoundlanders now fly out to work 2-week rotations on rigs in the Alberta oil sands or the offshore platforms themselves, then fly home to kitchens where their grandparents still speak of the fishery as though it might yet return. The tension is not hidden, nor is it resolved. Tourism, film production, and a growing tech sector in St. John's have layered a 21st century economy directly atop a 19th century one, the two coexisting less like a smooth transition and more like two tides meeting at the same headland, neither one fully winning the ground. Food here carries memory in every dish. Jig's dinner, salt beef boiled with cabbage, turnip, carrot, and potato, served with peas pudding on the side, remains the Sunday staple in homes across the island. A meal whose preparation alone takes half a day and whose consumption takes considerably less. Devoured around a table crowded with 3 generations at once. Cod tongues, pan-fried in scrunchions of crisp pork fat, turn a fish part once considered a byproduct into a genuine delicacy. Fish and brewis, salt cod soaked overnight and boiled with hardtack bread, carries the taste of centuries of ships' provisions repurposed into comfort food. Teutons, pan-fried discs of leftover bread dough drenched in molasses, remain the essential Saturday morning breakfast, a dish so beloved that no 2 households will agree on the correct thickness. Partridgeberries, a small tart fruit unique to the island's bogs, find their way into jams, pies, and sauces every autumn, hand-picked by families who treat the annual harvest as half chore, half outing. And through all of it runs tea, strong, dark, endlessly poured, the true social lubricant of any Newfoundland kitchen, offered to any visitor within seconds of their arrival, refused at considerable social cost. To move through this landscape on foot is to feel its scale in the body rather than merely the eye. In Gros Morne National Park, trails climb through fjord-cut valleys where 1,000-foot cliffs rise directly from freshwater lakes. The rock in places dating back over 400 million years. Exposed mantle from the Earth's interior thrust up and laid bare along the tablelands, an orange. Otherworldly landscape so barren it has been used to study conditions on Mars. Along the coastal barrens, wind never fully stops, bending grass flat in long silver waves, carrying salt spray far enough inland to coat exposed skin within minutes. Underfoot, the ground shifts from soft peat bog to exposed granite to loose scree without warning. Demanding attention with every step. Icebergs carved off Greenland drift south, each spring down what locals call Iceberg Alley. Some the size of 10-story buildings, groaning and cracking audibly as they melt. Occasionally rolling without warning close enough to swamp an unwary boat. Puffins nest by the tens of thousands on offshore stacks. Whales, humpback, minke, occasionally orca, surface close enough to shore to be watched from a kitchen window. And moose, introduced a century ago, now outnumber people in some regions, ambling across highways at dusk with an indifference that has ended more than one windshield.